All right, so let's get started. All right, and cool. All right. What's going on, my freaks and geeks? Welcome to the Score Round Table podcast. Guys, I want to thank you so much for joining us every week and listening to our nerdy podcast, guys, about everything from comic books to anime. And tonight, guys, it is nothing different. I want you to join us with our very special guest. This guy is a legend and a titan in the comic book industry, guys. I would love for you all to welcome comic book creator and the creator of Captain Canuck. Can you please welcome Mr. Richard Cumley?
Wow, thank you.
You're welcome.
Titan? Okay.
A little bit, a little bit of a big deal.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
gotta tell my wife that one. So,
Hey, like I said, we're happy to have you.
thank you. Now I learned where you guys are coming from, where you're located. Just so everybody knows, I live in Paris, Ontario, Canada.
Wow.
Yeah. And sometimes when we're talking to other people in Ontario, we have to say we live in Paris. They look at us funny, and then we say Ontario. Okay.
Yeah, because when you said Paris, I was like, oh wow, really?
Everybody thinks France. Everybody thinks France. There's probably, I bet there's a dozen Parises in the States. There's a pretty big Paris, Texas. That's a fair sized town too. And I know there's Parises all over the place. So
Exactly. It's just when you say Paris, like automatically, because I was just like, wait a second, I thought you were in Canada. What's going on?
yeah, I know. I know.
And
Yeah.
yeah, Chad, and you forgot to mention Paris, Georgia.
Ah,
Yeah. Is there a Paris, Georgia?
Oh, wow. I was about to say, I was like, I don't know, man.
I wouldn't be surprised. I bet you half the states have a town somewhere named Paris. In many cases, it'll be a really small town.
no,
So,
seriously. And Joshua, you probably just like really upset the people in that small city in Paris, Georgia. There's probably like a little tiny area
yeah.
called Paris, Georgia that we just don't know about. So
Yeah.
my apologies for the people out there in Paris, Georgia.
My
Yeah,
bad. We didn't
sorry,
know about
guys.
you until now.
But Richard, we just wanted to know. We like to ask every guest before we jump into the kind of meat and potatoes of everything, just like where you're at. Like, how have you been doing lately? I know it's been a lot of craziness going on, but just how have you been holding up these past couple of years?
I'm fine, thank you. I'm grateful to have generally good health. I'm certainly getting older, and I've worked as an illustrator pretty well all my life, not just comic books. In fact, as a lot of comic book artists that have done tons more art, comic book illustration than I've ever done. And I did children's books and greeting cards, hundreds of greeting cards, a lot of advertising and editorial illustration and all that kind of stuff. I don't really compare myself with a lot of these big name or even lesser named comic book artists because I don't churn out as much of that kind of illustration as a lot of other people do.
No, definitely understand. You're really kind about it, so we
Yeah,
appreciate
he's
that.
really
But
humble.
you're definitely a big deal to a lot of people in the industry, though. So
All right.
Yeah.
so we definitely still got to put that. We still got to give that.
Gotta
to
put
you,
that respect on
unfortunately.
it,
Yeah,
man.
we gotta.
Yeah.
But the biggest thing is, so you did talk a lot about, like I said, you're working in different industries as far as illustration is concerned. One thing
Yeah.
I want to ask though, the greeting card industry, is that really competitive? So how does that work? Are there like five different artists working on one topic and then they got to pick whichever
Hmm.
illustration looks the best?
I don't know what it's like today. When I was doing greeting cards in a big way, I haven't done any greeting cards in a couple of decades. It was in the late 80s that I was doing greeting cards, and I worked on almost exclusively on greeting cards for a couple of years. And I was doing the largest greeting card company in Canada was located in Cambridge, Ontario, which is 15 minutes down the road from us. And they no longer exist. Greeting cards, just like a lot of things, have taken a beating because of the internet. People don't use, we send cards to each other, but they're digital now.
Makes
And
sense. Yeah.
yeah, but there's still paper ones being printed, obviously. But it's definitely not like it was years ago before the internet. And I did, my goodness, like I said, hundreds of different greeting cards. I wrote a number of them too, and they were all mostly what do you call them? Gag cards. You know what I mean? Goofy. There was one that I liked. The doctor says your cheeks are looking nice and rosy. You're getting better, and there's more color in your face too. That kind of
Right.
goofy. But yeah, I like, and I would do. I was almost like a card factory. I would work on them every day, and I had an assistant for a while too because I was cranking. We were doing them in color, and of course back then it was all we didn't use Photoshop to color and stuff like that. But if you go, there's still card companies that will buy art and gags and the writing, and but you can find them, and but I'm sure that I know there's people out there still doing them. I'll go into a store that has cars and I still love to look at them. And some of
Same,
them
yeah.
are hilarious. I find cars that are just hilarious. And the art, in many cases, the art is just really, just does it. My friend Ron Leishman did a number of cars too. And he still does that kind of stuff. You know, I mean,
Hmm.
he's got a really good sense of humor, and his style is just perfect for greeting cards.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
As far as with greeting cards and then some of the under other industries you work in, like children's books, like newspapers, like when I just wanted to know a little bit more about your background. So number one, I know you're in Paris right now, but
Yep.
like where did you grow up? Where are you from? And how did you find yourself infatuated with like art and getting into that field professionally?
Yeah. I got a bit of history because I'm so old. I've got some history. And I grew up in Manitoba, Canada. Now,
Yeah.
okay, you know where North Dakota is?
Yeah,
We're north.
Yeah.
Manitoba is north of. When I tell that to people
super
who live in the
north.
southern states, they usually their eyes go bigger. You know what I mean? Oh my goodness, it might as well be Alaska. So,
Right.
but you know, my parents immigrated from England with my brother, and I was about 4.5 when we got to Manitoba. And then I grew up in Manitoba and moved to Winnipeg. So I was about maybe 60 miles away from the biggest city in that province is Winnipeg. And I moved there right after high school. I started out as a crest designer. So while I was in high school, I was drawing as I can remember drawing, entering contests when I was like 6. Neighbors helping me, etc. You know what I mean? A neighbor who could draw helped me enter the Draw Robin Hood contest, and I was 6 years old. And I entered other contests when I got older, and I won a few. In fact, I won a contest that was like a national contest, and when I was 12, and I got a brand new pair of ice skates as a prize. That was a big deal. Somebody living in Manitoba could appreciate a pair of ice skates. Okay.
I was about to say in Atlanta, Georgia, I'd be like, that's a wild gift. Okay, I don't know where I'm gonna use this, but
Yeah,
Oh,
where
no
are you
way.
going to use
it's
it?
100 degrees all the time now.
Yeah, yeah, I know. So, anyways, so I was drawing as a kid. I think when I was 12, I thought, this is what I'm going to do for a living one day, kind of thing. And so I did signs. Taught myself how to paint signs. And I did that during high school. Then when I finished high school, I worked for a sign shop for maybe 4 months or something like that. And then I got a job as a crest designer. So remember, this is like 1968, 69. And yeah, that's how old I am.
So it's
So
not that long ago.
Hey, it's not long.
68, 69, of course, everything had to be hand drawn. And any
Mm.
crest that you see on jackets, on any kind of outerwear, it was sports and you name it. You know what I mean? And yeah, they had to be hand drawn.
Mm.
You had to make a pattern. And there was a woman not too far from me. All that got sent to her. She marked all the material. Then there was literally 90 women working on machines who were making these crests. There was Swiss embroidery, there was Chanel, there was silk screening, all the different processes of making these crests. And then I designed embroidery too, mostly for women's outerwear and for what I would call boutique wear. Boutiques were a big thing in the early 70s. People would go in there to buy their bell bottoms and cool tops. And it was a hippie look.
Yeah.
And
Oh
a
yeah.
lot of people like that hippie look. They might not dress totally hippie look. Bell bottoms were really big back then. And I did some styling too back then for clothing. Mostly women's outerwear. Winnipeg was a big garment industry city in Canada back then. It isn't today. Most garments nowadays are made offshore in Bangladesh or
Right.
you know
Exactly.
India or China or places like that. So I did that, and I did portraits for a while too, actually. That's how I met my wife. I was
Oh
working
wow.
at a big department store doing portraits and caricatures. And I had made a deal with Eaton's department store. Eaton's was the biggest name in Canada until they went bankrupt about 20 years ago. And was on the eighth floor of the Eaton's department store in Winnipeg doing this. And this was in the 73, November, December of 1973. I know that date because that's when I met my wife, Evelyn. So we've been married since March 1975.
Wow.
So 47 years. So that's what I worked as a graphic artist for a little while. Again, this is before computers. So you got to think different. I mean, like
All right.
I had to hand draw stuff, you know what I mean? You know, and type. I had to get it, and I had to put wax on the back and paste it up and all that kind of stuff. And then I met Ron Leishman I met him at church actually. This would have been, I'm not sure if it was late 71 or early 72. I'm just not, he doesn't remember either, but, and it was him. I met him, and it was he who said there should be a Canadian superhero. And it was really his idea to do the comic book. And then we talked about it for couple of years. We just talked every time we got together, we would talk about it, and we thought it was a great idea. And I we eventually came up with the name Captain Canuck. It was either going to be Captain Canada or Captain Canuck, and we finally decided on Captain Canuck. And there's a story to that too, because there was three other people using the name Captain Canada for different routes. Somebody goofy. One Captain Canada had moose horns, for example. And I started to get really serious about the idea in 1973, and I did 4 pages of art, no story, but just a scenario. And I sent it to Harlequin Romance. Yeah, you guys know about Harlequin Romance? No, they're all over the world. They're romance paperback. They're big time. You're okay. Yeah, wrong crowd. Women buy them. Okay.
Oh, okay, okay. Gotcha.
All right.
Okay.
They would millions of them. They all over they churned them all like crazy. They still do. They're not as big as they were years ago. You know what I mean? And again, the internet has hurt them. And they were interested in actually publishing the comic book. But I had no story. We had a costume, and I could what probably would have gone with Harlequin. I would have had to move to Toronto from Winnipeg, which is a little bit of a distance. And Toronto's the biggest city in Canada. But an accountant that worked at a place called JD Products, where I did a lot of work, where I worked as an artist for a while, and then later on I worked as a freelance artist. And the boss, Mr. Schachter, who was a real character, I'd say something to him which I thought was really intelligent and clever, and his remark, holding a cigar in his hand, like Karl Marx, long before you guys. But he was a guy, and he
The
would say,
mustache. Yeah.
2 bits will get you on a bus, kid. And that's when bus fare was 25 cents. Okay. So that would be his response. And he was, at times he was hilarious. At other times I wanted literally to put my hands around his throat. But so he became like an uncle to me. And so anyways, I was doing stuff for them and freelancing, and I got to know their accountant. And he said to me, "No, don't go with Harlequin. You'll end up, you won't, they'll take the rights. And the other thing that really convinced me to not to go with Harlequin was that he said, I can get grant money for you to publish. You might have to publish it out of Churchill, Manitoba. And you probably don't even know nothing about Churchill, Manitoba, do you? Let me put it this way. Churchill, Manitoba has polar bears walking around the streets. You never mess with a polar bear. They'll eat you. You're just a snack to a polar bear. So anyways, because they wanted to encourage other industry, not just, they wanted to diversify industry in certain areas. So that's why we might get a grant. Never did. Never got a dime out of anybody. And instead I got a line of credit, a $7,000 line of credit in summer of 1974. And then I started working on it. I actually didn't start coming up writing the story and stuff until probably November, December of 1974. And then and then the first issue came out in May of 1975. And I'd never done comic books before, and I was just I was picking up comic books and looking at them. I hadn't been a comic book collector before that. I had looked at comic books, but I'd not. I liked them. I just didn't envision myself working in comic books until Captain Canuck. And then I felt like I had to try and learn this storytelling technique, storytelling devices as quickly as I could. So, anyways, and I think my timing was really good with Captain Canuck because wow, the media reception, the public reception was in Canada was pretty big. And like every newspaper, it was the first story of the national news. It was like in Canada, it went over really big. And I think my timing was good. I think Canadians were really ready and almost looking for their own sort of superhero figure.
Yeah.
America had Captain America, and that's the thing about Canada. Our culture is very similar to America, the culture in America.
Yeah.
Very, our entertainment, much of our entertainment comes from the US. And if somebody blindfolded you and dropped you in a Canadian city, you would, for a little while, you would think you were still in the States somewhere, maybe in North Dakota or somewhere. And then you'd see a red mailbox and you'd say, what? And then little telltale signs would and then you'd see a Canadian flag somewhere and you'd say, wait a minute. So, anyhow.
Yeah.
Yeah. What inspired the design of Captain Canuck? Was it like trying to go off of Captain America or something like that? Or
Oh, yeah. There was definitely some influence from Captain America, and the look was pretty similar. We used the flag, and it was
yeah.
the colors of the flag, and so yeah, in that sense, it was very much the whole idea of the costume was very much borrowed from Captain America. In fact, any nationalistic superhero character you find anywhere in the world will follow that pattern. The flag will be represented, their national colors will be represented in their costume. It's pretty well given.
Yeah, I guess after Captain America, it's like, why change it? Just put a flag on every single person who's representing like a country.
Yeah.
There's
Exactly.
Captain Britain and all this
I was
other
gonna say
stuff. So
Captain Britain. Yeah.
it just falls on. But I do say I love the way you did put the color scheme on Captain Canuck. That was really cool.
Yeah, thank you. I think when you look at history, the comic book as a medium, as a format, was invented in the United States.
Yeah.
You go back almost 100 years, and the first comic books were really just newspaper strips collected into a magazine format.
Yeah.
And that was the beginning.
Yeah, but even considering that, when I was doing research, apparently, yeah, the comic you guys made in 1975 was like, it said something like it was the first indie comic to be published in color.
Yeah, that's what I've been told.
Hmm.
It's not any research that I've done, but I've been told it was the first independently published comic book done in color. And we were the first to be an independent comic book to be distributed nationwide. And then we were the first Canadian comic book ever to be distributed nationwide in the United States. So and I didn't know that I was doing that. People tell me after the fact, oh, I did? What? Oh, well, you're just trying to make a living. You're just trying to get it out there. And
yeah, you're not worried about, I was the first to do this. You're like, nah, I was just trying to make the rent happen.
Yeah,
Exactly.
exactly. Just trying to make rent.
Yeah, but because I was thinking like, he's not called Captain Canada, but what's a Canuck? Because I've heard of Canuck before. Because I think it's like a hockey team called the Canuck, but
That's the Vancouver Canucks.
so I'm like,
I've
what's a Canuck?
I've had issues with their legal team, in fact, the Vancouver Canucks,
Wow.
which got resolved in my favor, by the way. They just didn't want me to make any Captain Canuck hockey sticks.
Oh, okay, we're good.
Yeah, we're or pucks, of course. And, but no, Canuck is, and I think the research that I saw, it probably goes back over 100 years, and it's like calling an American a Yankee. So and Canuck, it's easier to identify that with Canada. But yeah, I think it goes way back to turn of the late 1800s that somebody came up with the term, and there was a Johnny Canuck. So this is something I found out after, I think it was issue number 2 had come out. I got a phone call from the creator of Johnny Canuck. So during World War II, there was an embargo against, so any non-essential items it manufactured in the States, they weren't allowed into Canada during World War II. And of course, that was a big one, was comic books. So that Americans could not distribute their products in Canada during the war. And so that opened the door to a lot of small comic book publishers in Canada. So a bunch of them popped up real quick in Toronto, Vancouver, and started publishing comic books. And they were all black and white. I don't know if there was any in color, but I don't think there was. But there was a Johnny Canuck. And Johnny Canuck was a Canadian soldier. Basically, it was all war stories. And there's one story where he punches out Hitler. And I think Captain America punched out Hitler too. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Front cover.
Neither one of them finished him off, which would have been a lot better off for the world. But
Yeah,
they just gave him a good old punch to the chin.
yeah, just a punch in the jaw. Whoop-de-doo. You know, he's back in action, killing millions of people.
Right. But a good old punch, that'll show him.
Yeah. Anyhow, so there was a Johnny Canuck, and so obviously the name was already well established.
And then you were just like, yeah, I do Captain Canuck though. We're cool though. We're not the same thing. We're cool.
Yeah. And we all feel that Captain Canuck works better than Captain Canada. There is a Captain Canada character, but he's very few people know, like a superhero character. But there's no comic books published about him. There was one book published. His costume is really bizarre, and it's far out bizarre, and it had a lot of Far Eastern philosophy involved in the story. So it was really different. And so obviously the people involved that was their thing. That was really all they were interested in doing. You know what I mean? Expounding on their particular philosophy.
Yeah, good thing like you can avoid the lawsuits.
Yeah.
That was a close one.
Most definitely.
I had some challenges when I registered the trademark, but it all in the end got resolved. Just a bunch of paperwork and more fees, and was able to overcome the objection that I had to it. So anyways, that was another long story that I tried to make short right now.
Yeah. But
so anyway, let me give you a brief history of Captain Canuck then. So
sure.
I published it in 1975 out of Winnipeg, Manitoba.
Okay.
It was printed there. As I said, it really sold. It was distributed in Canada and in certain areas of the United States, mostly border states like Michigan and New York, and it didn't go deep down south. And remember, I had a $7,000 line of credit, and I had credit with a printer. The print runs were 200,000 copies per issue. And this is nearly all just newsstand distribution, which is mass market distribution, and which is still done today. Now, comic books, nobody uses that system for distributing comic books anymore. It's a money-losing proposition nowadays, and it is for most magazines. They don't make money when they do through mass market distribution, because it's all sold on a guaranteed sale basis. So you go into a convenience store and you buy a copy of Time magazine, and let's say there's 10 copies in that store, and let's say the store sold 3 copies. Those 7 copies that didn't get sold go back to the distributor and are destroyed, and the publisher gets no money for those. They only get paid for the 3 that are sold. And the reason publishers still are using that mass market distribution system is because it promotes their magazine. It's like mini billboards or whatever in stores to promote their magazine, and they're going after subscribers. So when you buy that Time magazine, you'll see an ad in there, subscribe and get it for a lot cheaper than buying it on the newsstand, buddy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But that was the only, there were only, in 1975, there might have been a half a dozen comic book stores in the world, in North America anyways. I doubt there was any in Europe. And there was very few. Maybe there was 10. I don't even think there was 10. There was one, or at least one in New York City. I think there was one in San Francisco. There was one in Winnipeg. There was one in Toronto. There was one in Vancouver. And there might have been a few others here and there. And then, so but that started to grow. That started to grow in the mid 1970s, the direct market. And by the end of the 70s, there was more. There was maybe 100 or something like that in North America. And so we started selling more to the independent stores that were buying from distributors, like a guy by the name of Phil Suling out of Brooklyn, New York, was one of the first guys to do that distribution. And because I remember meeting him, I went to Brooklyn. I went to New York. I got on a subway. I went to Brooklyn very first time. I come up from the subway. I'm walking behind two kids. They had this thick Brooklyn accent, and I was fascinated to hear it. I couldn't understand some of it, but it was just so, we'd only seen that in movies, people with that kind of accent. And Phil had a really thick Brooklyn accent too. And I found myself listening intently in case I didn't understand some of what he was saying. So anyways, after issue number 3, I ran out of money. And my printing costs alone were like $20,000 per issue. And so we relied on our sources of income were single copy sales, advertising sales. We had products that sold by mail order that we generated some income from, but it was really hard making it all work financially. So I got an offer to run a newspaper in Cardston, Alberta, which is a small town in southern Alberta. And in August of 1976, I packed my wife, I had a couple of really small kids, and my two artists, George Freeman and Claude Sunderbank, we all moved to this small town, population about 3,500, to run a weekly newspaper. And we enjoyed it. We learned stuff. Again, no computers. It was all hand pasted up, but we were only ran it for 5 months because we found we could not it didn't generate enough income to support us all. So we all moved up to Calgary, which is the biggest city in Alberta. And we all went back to work as commercial artists. And George went back to Winnipeg. So Claude Saint-Aubin and George, and those guys came along just after I finished the second issue. George and Claude literally just showed up at my door, and they were godsend because I needed help. And so we ran the newspaper, we moved it. And then in 78, I was able to get some people to invest. And we started publishing again in early 1979. And that's when we published the rest of the 15 issues that were published in what I call the original series, and most people do. And then there was a long 10 years before I did it again. And there was a few things that we did with Captain Canuck over that 10 years, but there was no comic books published over that time. Then it was sporadic even after that. And then it wasn't until I did Captain Canuck Reborn, the 4 issues of Reborn in 93 to 96, and I did a newspaper strip in Canada at that same time. Then in about 2009, I met Fadi Hakim, and then we started to put things together, and that's now Chapter House. And so a number of issues were published through Chapter House, and now it's called Lev Gleason Publishing. Now it's more or less ongoing. It's not real regular, but it's at least ongoing. And now there's animation in the works. I don't know if anybody saw the animated web series. Did anybody see that?
No, I didn't see it.
I think you'll enjoy it immensely. There's only 5 episodes. They're only about 3 minutes long each. And in that 15 minutes, you get the whole story arc. And you just punch in Captain Canuck animated web series, and it'll pop up in a number of places. And I know it'll be on Lev Gleason's website too, and you can watch all 5 episodes. And it won an award. It's a lot of fun to watch. There's a fair bit of humor in it as well, and it's that kind of limited animation that it works well with the storyline. So, but we've signed up with a bigger animation company, and they're going to put together, now there's going to be a regular TV animated series, and maybe in a year from now at the earliest you'll start to hear about it and maybe start to see something. Probably more like a year and a half. And there's live action TV series interest too. I've optioned Captain Canuck something like 4 times, and option agreements, if you don't know, if I can explain that for people who might wonder what I'm talking about, is typically this is what typically happens with an intellectual property, whether it's a story, a script, a character, whatever that is. A production company will make an agreement, what's referred to as an option agreement, with the rights holders to basically to hold that property. They, for a period of time, they will have a hold on that property while they try and put things together to both develop and produce it as a movie or a TV series. But when that option agreement usually has a time frame, and let's say it's a year, let's say you sign a deal, and that's pretty typical to sign an option agreement with a production company for 1 year. But at the end of that year, if they haven't put things together, if they don't have their financing lined up, if they don't have development already ready to go, and the rights holder, the person, whoever holds the rights to that property, that intellectual property, they might decide, okay, gave you a year, nothing's going anywhere, they move on. And basically that happened 4 times in my case. So I did extend with one company 6 months after it got 4 years, and they paid every time. The second year, the third year, they paid a little more money to hold the option. And then I think it went 4 years. And then after 4 years, I let them basically give them some leeway for another 6 months, but they still weren't able to get it together. You know what I mean? I get it. It's tough to get the money together, to line up the key people, whether that be cast, whether that be producers, directors, etc. Got to get all that lined up, ready to go thing. And then and you need all that lined up by the time that term is over, and you're ready to go to basically green light it and go at it. You know what I mean? Then there's a purchase that takes place. So just for people out there that are listening who are wondering what an option agreement is, I've tried to explain it a little bit.
So it's pretty much like just them telling you, hey, we're going to get all the things together by this period in time. If we can't, it's back to where we're not going to be able to do it, and it's yours again, and then you can go another option agreement for another period of time. Okay, that sounds like a lot of work before even getting to there, because that takes a lot of time. I don't even think you can get like a lot of that stuff done in like a year or whatever. But I hopefully that they get it together and you get like a live action version, because I could see a live action version working for Captain Canuck.
We have 4 companies that are interested, and we're just trying to approach things differently. We've been locked down by other companies for a while they're trying to get it all together, and the rights have been locked down for them. And the problem with that is that if they don't get it together, you've lost a couple of years, and now you're starting from scratch again with a whole new company. And that, oh my goodness, and then suddenly years have gone by, and that's happening with me in that. But now we've got companies that are interested. We really think we're a lot closer to making it happen. But it's a lot of work and a lot of waiting and a lot of meetings, and it can get draggy. So.
A lot of business and corporate stuff does kind of heavy.
Yeah, but that's interesting, because I was actually looking up some stuff on like some of the Captain Canuck projects, and a lot of it is they're like a little tight-lipped on a lot of it. It's like they just say, yeah, this date here is blah 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 blah, and they don't really say anything else. So.
Yeah, and that's because so much isn't even finalized, and they don't know a lot of things yet, because if they don't have the people they need to do what needs to be done, directing, producing, etc., cast, all of that stuff. The casting can take place What's the big thing is getting the financing in place. But the people that are going to provide the money, and in Canada, there's some government money you can get, tax credit money you can get. But you still have to have everything lined up. You have to have who's the producer, who's the director, where's it going to get made, what's the budget, all of that stuff. That all has to be, and that takes a bit of work to put all that together. You don't have to have. It really helps if you have some key cast members signed up. That's a big help, and then you might almost need that to make it work. You could go ahead without that in place, with the idea that you're going to make the whole idea of casting the character part of the promotional aspect of the film. Okay, so we've got the green light to make it. Who's going to play the part? And then you get people involved. Okay, I think it should be him. I think it should be them. You might even run a contest. And so, anyways, it's still a lot of work. Whatever.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of work.
It does a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Does it work the same for like merchandising as far as like action figures and
Yeah,
just
that's all important. And that's one of the advantages of a property like Captain Canuck, is that there is definitely going to be merchandise, licensed products as part of the whole mix. And that helps. There's going to be another source of income besides just trying to sell tickets or just trying to, in most cases, it's theater tickets. That's for big $100 million productions now. A lot of stuff is just produced for Netflix and for regular broadcast television. And a lot of streamers, that's where a lot of movies are ending up now, is on one of the streaming services. Is it Amazon? Is it Netflix? Is it Disney? And that's where the biggest market is now for any new productions.
Yeah.
Yeah, DVDs are very small now comparatively. Theatrical releases are far less now. So
Yeah, it's all moved to streaming platforms and stuff like that, like in-home stuff. That's where the big money goes, because it's more people are going to be wanting to stay home and watch things instead of going to a theater or whatever, especially after COVID and stuff like that too.
Yeah.
As well. But yeah, I'm not surprised that those are like the only markets that you can go to. Is there any like indie places you can go that are not like as big as those, that are like at least you can get it there? Like something that are smaller, I'm sorry.
say that again.
Are there like
Chad?
smaller? Oh, I'm sorry. Am I coming out? Am I going in and out?
Yeah, no, just repeat your question.
Oh,
again.
okay. And what I was saying is, like, are there like smaller indie like companies that you can go to and get like Canuck put there instead of like really going through Netflix or Disney or something like that?
There's smaller operations like Hulu, and there are smaller streamers out there for sure, but there is, Netflix has already expressed interest. That's the other thing, is we've got to make Captain Canuck appealing to an American audience too. That's going to involve having characters in the series that Americans can relate to, which means typically an American character.
Yeah.
or aliens or something. So that's all. That's been a concern. You've got to realize we're here in Canada. We're roughly a third of the population of the United States. A tenth of the population. And so whenever anything is going to be produced, of course they look at the American market. They desperately want to be able to sell their programming into the United States as well, typically. And of course into Europe too. The thing with Captain Canuck, there are countries in Europe and places like, and even places like South Africa or Australia, places like Holland, Great Britain, they're much more receptive to stuff that's simply Canadian than maybe America would be. So there's a lot of stuff produced up here in Canada that's for American television. Tons of stuff is produced in Vancouver and Toronto because it's cheaper to produce up here than it is to produce down in Hollywood. And that's why there's so much of it being done in Canada. The dollar difference is a big help. A whole bunch of other factors make it a lot cheaper. There's tax credits available. So that's why there's so much production in Canada that it's really, I think with Supergirl, a lot of these shows are produced in Canada. Arrow, that was produced in Canada, all out in Vancouver. The other thing too is that they used to call four walling many years ago, and a lot of people won't even know that term anymore. But there were actually smaller film production companies that would produce a movie and actually distribute it themselves. They would rent theaters, typically in small towns, small cities. They would rent the theater. They would take that movie to that theater and it would show at the theater and they would get half of the ticket receipts. I know about this because it was something like 1972 that I did that for a couple of weeks for a small nature. It was like the movies were all kind of somebody lost in the wilderness and getting attacked by mountain lions and stuff like that. You know what I mean? And so that was their specialty. They would make the movie. Then people like me would be assigned a certain area. I was assigned Saskatchewan, which is right next door to Manitoba, by the way. And it's also very cold there too. So that's north of Montana, just and parts of North Dakota. And so, in fact, I was driving around with that movie in the winter, and I went to small towns. There was the bigger cities took it too, but often it would be a small town. I would take the film in a case. They would show it. I would make sure they weren't cheating the producer when they took all the tickets and took all the money and sold the tickets. I would walk out of there with a chunk of cash, $3,000, something like that. And then I'd have to go find a place to put it in, be able to deposit it, get it out of my hands real quick.
Yeah.
So I don't know if anybody does that anymore. But no, sorry, I do know some really small operations that they won't go all over the country doing it, but they'll do it in a region. They might pick three theaters. They'll go rent one of the theaters in a multiplex to show their movie. And then when people come in to see their movie, they get the gate or they get maybe all of the gate, or typically what they do nowadays, they have to rent the space. Let's say they're renting the space for $200. And yet, let's say they sell $500 worth of tickets to see the movie during that day. They've made $300 kind of thing.
Yeah. But since we're on like the topic of like movies and production, what have you done for? I know you have CKR Productions and Comely Productions.
Yeah.
What have you done for? Like, what kind of projects have you done for those?
Is long gone, and Comely Productions is long gone too. I registered the name Star Writer Productions not long ago. I did a magazine called Star Writer and the Peace Machine. And the other thing that I did that went pretty well was called Trumpet and Friends Fun Stuff. It was a newspaper feature, and then there was a children's book and a children's activity book. And that one did quite well. The book sold really well. The newspaper feature did quite well. It was the most widely distributed newspaper feature to come out of Canada back in 86 to 91 when I did it. It didn't make enough money that I could rely on it for a living, but it gave us some income. And that was a kids feature. It's a kids storybook. But I did a magazine, a sci-fi magazine called Star Writer and the Peace Machine, and which was in the same format as Warren magazines, which published Eerie and The Rook and other magazines like that, which were beautifully done. And they were black and white with a colored cover. And then they were in a more of a magazine format. And they're all gone now. It was a format that just didn't work. It worked for a little while, but nobody wanted that format anymore. It had to be either a comic book in full color or it's kind of like VHS versus Beta. When Beta ended up losing, and not because Beta did a worse system, people say it was actually a better system for videotape. But anyways, there you go. The public decided. So yeah, so like I said, I did children's books. I did all kinds of illustration, advertising, editorial. I have 8 children, so I didn't have the luxury of specializing in anything. I just took what I could get and that would generate some income. I did, I think, about 10 books for Grolier and children's books. And these are books that Grolier was big 20, 30 years ago. They would sell these books. They were always 27 books to a set. And it was all mail order sales back then. and they would sell you to give you the first book free and then get you hooked on getting all the rest of them, kind of thing. That was the way they operated, and seemed to be successful for a while like that. But so I did that. I did storyboarding for commercials, trying to think of stuff I didn't do. I did some writing. I did some writing for newspapers, and I did some video production, and I wrote articles and illustrated articles for a couple of magazines out of the States that were specifically devoted to video production, people getting into digital video production. So
Yeah, but no, that was pretty much the next point I was gonna bring up. Like, just to for you to like elaborate on your like video production work.
yeah, I did most of the stuff I did for other people. I just helped them do theirs, and I was paid to do that. I did a video called Drawing from the Pros that did really well for me in the educational
Right.
market. So I shot it and edited it all by myself, kind of thing. And I interviewed a number of artists, and mostly working in animation for that. And a friend got me access to these guys. One of the people on there is that I interviewed is Alex Nino. And if just Google Alex Nino, amazing artist. He did comic books, and then he ended up working for Disney for quite a few years, character design, and but amazing artist, Filipino artist. And I did one other kind of artsy video I wrote a 2-part article about the making of the storyboarding and the making of the video. I went through the process mostly so I could write the magazine article. And then I ended up with a video that was like a classical music video. So it was okay. It was okay, but it's not like a rock video. You don't get as many eyeballs on video. Especially, anyways, by the way, I got to start saying goodbye here to you guys because I got my wife waiting downstairs, and
Oh, okay.
Okay,
I got to
I
eat
got
some
for sure.
popcorn or something. Yeah.
got one
Okay,
last thing to ask you.
yeah,
Yes.
but yeah,
Oh, are you gonna ask
yeah,
the final question?
yeah, yeah,
Any questions? Go ahead.
yeah. So basically, you do a whole lot of things, especially like the Comely Crane and stuff like
Yes.
that. Yeah,
Okay. Yeah, the company crane. That was again a sideline that helped to bring in some income. And I made hundreds of those things, and they sold all over the place. And I haven't made them in at least 10 years. Over 10 years ago, I stopped making them. And it was a lot of work. And but like I said, I wanted one for myself for my own video production, and that's what got me into making them. I got one that it was lousy, and I said, I'm sure I can design a better one than this, and that's how it all started. 1999 is when I started doing that, and I did it for about 14 years, something like that. Yeah.
oh,
So,
well, but yeah,
all you got to do is have 8 kids, and then suddenly you're constantly looking for means of income. You know, how am I going to make without having to go work 9 to 5 somewhere?
yeah,
Yeah, definitely.
but
I
no,
was
for sure.
teaching for a while too. I taught at a college for a little while, first
Okay.
doing continuing ed courses, and then I taught full time during 1 year. And it was okay. I might do it again, but that too can be a lot of work. And
Yeah.
and if you got a whole bunch of students that really shouldn't be there in the first place, and it just doesn't make it as much fun. When you've got students that have some talent and are really eager to develop the talent they have, then yeah, then it's a lot more exciting. But when most of the people in the class really shouldn't be there, they should be doing something else. It's not a lot of fun then. Especially when some of them are ornery too. They're just miserable about it. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I don't want to take up any more of your time, but yeah, this is like a closing remark. Like, what's some advice that you would give, I don't know, some bright-eyed, bushy-tailed guy trying to get into the entertainment industry?
One has to hustle. You have to be entrepreneurial, and you have to be willing to get out there and hustle. I know a film company in Canada, and their movies are not very good, but yet he's making a living at it. And that's because he works hard at it. Even though the finished product, in my opinion, is and it's not great, but yet he's able to make a living at it, doing it. And that's because he just works hard. Sure, he has some talent. Don't get me wrong. He has some talent. It hasn't developed into a really dramatically good product that he turns out yet. And yeah, obviously, yeah, and people have to be passionate about it too. They have to be passionate. When I was I was in Calgary early 1980s. I was working in Calgary, working as a commercial artist. I was working on Star Rider and the Peace Machine. I was starting to, and I had three younger artists coming to me. And one artist was going to school in Spokane, Washington, and his parents lived in Calgary, Alberta. And that's maybe, I don't know, 3 hours away or something. I don't know. It's not that far. And so he'd come up, and whenever he had breaks from school, Christmas, summer, Easter, etc., he'd come and see me and show me his latest work and to get some feedback from me because I had done Captain Canuck. I had another young man in particular, so these two stand out. He wanted to be an inker, and he would come to me and show me his latest work. And these guys, and I had a third artist who was working part-time, but spending about 6 hours a day at the drawing board. So he'd work maybe 4 hours a day and then spend 6 hours at his drawing board. So the guy who wanted to be an inker, I accidentally ran into him at DC Comics about, I don't know, 4 or 5 years later. He was doing some inking work. And he had dual citizenship, like his parents or grandparents were American. So that was one guy, and I know he worked hard at it, and this was his goal, and he worked towards it, and he became an inker. I don't know if he stayed an inker. Maybe he moved on to other things. I really can't even remember his name, to be honest with you. I had the other artist. His last name was Hansen. He wanted to work in comic books, and eventually he did a series for Marvel. Now, I don't think he stayed in comic books. He went on to do something else. And then the third guy, you'll know the third guy when I tell you a little more. So he used to come and see me. I used to tell him things about his art that I didn't like. I don't like the way you draw faces. They're too cartoony. You got to work on your hands. You got to work on your feet. Blah blah. And he would politely accepted my advice. Then I have a letter from him. So I went with him in 1983 to the San Diego Comic-Con. That's the only time I've ever been to that Comic-Con. And at that time, I was doing coloring for companies, not with a computer, but we had come up with a method of coloring comic books that involved using animators paint on acetate overlays. So I was doing that for some other companies. And I was also trying to promote a series. This was another series. So Star Rider and the Peace Machine, but I had another one I was trying to sell and couldn't at the time. But so to save money, I went with this other guy, and he was trying to get to doing some drawing for some of the companies. And his dad came with us. He was 10 years younger than me. He was in his early 20s. I was in my early 30s. So we shared a motel together to save money. And while he was there, he took samples around to 40 different publishers. There was a lot of small publishers back then, just publishing in black and white, some of them. And he went to Marvel and DC, of course. And he showed them his work. He didn't get a bite. And I know he was disappointed about that. So we went back up to Calgary. Shortly after that, I moved to Ontario from Calgary, Alberta. And I was doing children's books at that time. And I have a letter from him. Dear Mr. Cumley, even though I was only 10 years older, he called me Mr. Cumley, which is fine. I'm a very respectful kind of guy. And he said, here's a character I want to do one day. And I'm going to call him Spawn. And yeah. Now, So shortly after that, so what he did when he got back, I didn't know this at the time that he was doing this. He had the names and addresses of 40 different editors. So over the next 14 months, every single week, he mailed out a new batch of photocopied samples to all 40 of these guys. And he did that for 14 months. So every week, how many weeks is there in 14 months? 50, 60, something like 60 weeks or something like that.
Sounds
So,
about right.
so if somebody was piling up his samples, yeah, so what would they have? A pile like this of samples? And so I remember this because I went to Chicago in 1985, I think the same year we moved, to see First Comics, and this name might not mean anything to you. They were one of the bigger small companies. And so I was there to tell them coloring, the coloring method that we were doing. And I was talking to, there was only 2 or 3 guys in the whole company. It was a small company. And Gold, Mr. Gold was the last name of the publisher, I believe. And that's interesting because our bad guy is named Mr. Gold in the Captain Canuck series. I'm one of the bad guys. So I'm there talking to the editor, and I don't remember his name, in the office, small office. And he comes out, Gold, I can't remember his first name. I don't want to call him Mr. Gold, but so he comes out and he said, "Do you know Todd McFarlane?" I said, "Yeah, I know him. I don't see him a lot anymore. And I know him. I know who he is. He's a good guy." And he said, and then he said this, "Can you tell him to stop phoning me every," like, he was like this guy. So not only was he sending all of these people these samples every week, he followed up with a phone call. "Did you get my samples? What do you think? Got anything I can work on?" You know what I mean? That's almost like a full-time job for 14 months. Finally, somebody gave him a break, and he did some small job. That turned now, and of course, you can imagine he did it on time. They were happy with it. And that moved him on to the next job. The next job, he was doing the Hulk, apparently. I didn't know all this at the time. Then he did Spider-Man, which was a big deal. And then he quit and started for Image, and a huge success. So whenever I would teach classes, like continuing ed classes, I taught it at a couple of colleges up in Ontario here. I would, I don't know, give my class, what do you call that? A declaration of, I don't know the wording I would give this, but I would say, "Listen, guys, I'm going to give you advice and direction, etc. But there was a guy I used to give direction and advice to, and he didn't listen to a lot of it, in my opinion, but that did not stop him from becoming hugely successful. So take everything I tell you with a grain of salt." There you go.
Yeah,
My instructions, that qualifier. Anyways, it's been a pleasure, you guys.
Yeah,
Pleasure.
definitely been a pleasure.
And we're almost as hot up here as you guys are down there, all of you. It's like, really got hot weather up here. I know you all know Fahrenheit, so I'll tell you, it's been 90. We've had days where it's felt, with the humidity, it's felt like 100. And we don't get that very long. You know what I mean? We'll only get that for typically a few weeks in the summer, and then the rest of the time it's much more pleasant. You know what I mean? But yeah, I know. Georgia, your summers are probably pretty warm all summer long, right?
Hey, we got 102 to 104 here.
104.
102 to 104 all week.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's not any better in Georgia. Like,
Whoa.
I can cook dinner on the sidewalk.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Crack me some eggs open.
Right. Fry them on the concrete.
Yeah, we could almost do that here too. When I say 100 degrees, I'm talking the humidity factor. It might be 35 temperature, and then the humidity makes up the difference to make it feel like 41 Celsius, because we're all metric here. But I still know the Fahrenheit system. I remember it when I was a kid. So anyways, all right. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks you.
It's a pleasure meeting you guys. Pleasure being on your podcast.
Pleasure to have you.
Yeah, and
Marcus?
before you leave,
Yes.
Marcus Long.
Yes, sir.
Do I ever? Okay, nice meeting you too.
Nice to meet you.
Where are you,
Mr.
Marcus?
Canuck. I'm in Georgia too. I'm in
You're in
Atlanta,
Georgia.
Georgia.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Are you all in Atlanta?
Yeah,
Besides
all of
me.
us except for Demetrius. Yeah.
Are you all in Atlanta, Georgia? Everybody?
No, Demetrius
Yeah.
Oh,
is
they
in
are,
California.
but
Yeah,
I'm in
that's the
California.
Venezuelan
You're in California. That's right. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's okay.
All right.
Cool.
But yeah, it was great. It was great having you. Thanks for coming out.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Yeah, before we go, just everybody tell the audience who you are before we
Oh,
leave.
yeah,
Okay.
Dimitri.
I'm
You
Josh.
want me to tell?
Oh yeah, like I was gonna. Yeah, you can go ahead. I was gonna go with.
No, you do it. You do it.
Okay.
Okay.
You may do all the promotional. Find us on squareroundtablepod.fandomum.com. Make sure that if you want to find this video, or sorry, this podcast, you can look us on squareroundtablepod.fandomum.com. And if you want to see the actual video, you can find that on YouTube under Square Roundtable Podcast. And if you like the video, smack the like button, leave us a comment, share the video, and also hit the notification bell on the right side of the video so you get notified of this video and videos in the future. And hit all our socials, our Twitter, Instagram, and that pesky Facebook group. We need some people there in that group.
Please join the Facebook group, and we might just throw in a couple extra comedy cranes. We might have
Yes.
some in the back.
Got a
All
little
right,
couple
you know-
extra.
in the back.
When you email me some information, I'll put it on our social media too.
Cool.
So we'll
Awesome.
promote it on. I have some social media. I just got into social media not that long ago. You can imagine I'm really old school. What's social media? What is that? So I'm learning.
Yeah, I'm not any better. I don't know.
He's horrible.
Yeah, but yeah, all that stuff, and also before we go, Mr. Comley, yeah, tell everybody like any project that you're working on currently, and if you have anything coming out.
Well, I'm working on some Captain Canuck projects, obviously, right now. The one that I'm working on, Captain Canuck 17, which is actually a continuation of the original series. It's weird how that we're working that in there, but I won't be done for 3 or 4 weeks, and then I don't know when it's going to be published. But the newspaper strip is going to be published as a book. So I did a newspaper strip for I don't know, not quite 2 years, and that's all going to be collected into a book eventually. And it's probably we're actually working on doing a newspaper strip with Canadian newspapers again. Comic strips and newspapers aren't what they were, 30, 40, 50 years ago. They were a big deal back then. And of course, everybody knows that printed newspapers are slowly fading away. Electronics are taking over. So we all know that. There's still people buying printed newspapers, but it's not the same numbers that it was by far. We're working on that, and the Reborn will be collected into a book too. The 4 issues of Reborn will be remastered, recolored, blah, blah, blah. There's a fair bit of work to be done on that. So I don't know when that's going to come out. So I've got a fair bit of work piled up that I got to do, and some of it I'm procrastinating on, but what can I say? Sometimes I pretend I'm retired. There's days when I think, hey,
I understand.
really
I
retired.
understand.
Totally get that.
Yeah.
You'll get a few more than a few with you guys, but one day you'll feel that way.
Sir,
Yeah,
hopefully, yes, sir.
definitely. But yeah, so we've been the Square Roundtable Podcast, and my name is Joshua Singleton. # yes, # no.
I'm Demetrius, and I'm not saying the hashtag yes, hashtag no stuff.
Good,
I'm
good,
Marcus.
that's my thing.
Marcus Long. Okay. All right. Been a blast.
All
Oh, yeah,
right.
definitely. And this has been the Square Roundtable Podcast again. Peace.
We got
All right.
good night.